It's the TMZ Behind the Bar podcast with the TMZ lawyers, Jason Beckerman and Derek Kaufman.
Welcome, guys, to Behind the Bar. We're partnering again today with Blue Apron, the freshest, tastiest, and easiest way to eat at home, Derek.
The best new part of my life.
That's right.
Yep.
All for less than $10 per person per meal. And go to blueapron.com/TMZ to get 3 meals free, including free shipping.
Absolutely.
Last week, a video emerged, Derek. I know we've been all about this here, showing production staff on the set of the movie A Dog's Purpose forcing an obviously distressed German Shepherd into a real roiling pool of water.
Yeah, they had outboard motors roiling the water to look like a frothy whitewater rapid.
Yep. Initially, there was this enormous public outcry. We had it here. You know, Harvey Levin, who's a huge dog lover, was really upset in seeing this movie. And I think it was tough for everybody to watch, regardless of how you ultimately came down.
Yeah, I mean, Harvey loves animals more than people. I think that's a fair statement. I think he'd come in here and say they're much better.
That's right. And the movie and its producers were initially widely denounced, but I think as the days have rolled on, we've seen a somewhat of a shift in the narrative. I mean, there are obviously some real detractors still, and there are picketers ready to go out and stand in front of movie theaters and the whole thing and dissuade people from going to see this movie. But where there once were just sort of a cacophony of cries of torture and cruelty to animals and the like, I've heard a lot of people now equating it more to dogs in the bathtub. You know, trying to get a feisty dog into a bathtub, and how difficult that can be, and the dog's clawing at the side of the tub. And they recognize that while the video, as we said, is really hard to watch, and it is, that the dog was never in any danger whatsoever, or certainly no moral danger, according to, we'll talk a little bit about what the producers have to say on this thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's been a backlash to the backlash, right? The initial shock of the video was seeing a dog in distress, forced into the water, submerged for a period of time before he was rescued. It was disturbing to watch. But now you're right. The passage of time sort of gets the other perspective. Was this dog really in danger? Is this really a big problem for the film industry? And that's what got us thinking, right?
That is. And I that's what got us thinking, not so much about the physical danger, but the emotional trauma that it might take upon an animal like this to be sort of thrown into roiling water. It's different than a bathtub, right? I mean, there is certainly a greater danger, to the extent any exists, of a roiling water that's being frothed up by outboard motors.
Yeah, they're trying to depict a scene that is a dog rescuing someone in a jeopardized situation. If a human is sort of drowning in roiling water, it's dangerous for the dog to rescue them in that situation. To create that, they created some real danger for the dog in some ways.
And I think what was important here was to get the perspective, because we had heard, PETA came right out and some other animal organizations came right out.
Oh, reliable PETA. They come out very quickly and strongly.
Right. And denounced what they saw on the video. But the executive producer of the movie, A Dog's Purpose, came on to TMZ-LIVE recently. His name's Gavin Pallone, and he really did sort of lay out the case for what. Well, first of all, he explained what happened, and then he laid out the case for why maybe it wasn't quite as bad as the initial reaction made it seem.
That's right. Gavin made, I think, 3 broad points. First, he says the video that we show, we broke it on the website, was actually edited, and it looks edited. There's a few scenes cut together, and he says the way it was cut together was actually a bit misleading because you don't actually see the dog rescued after he's being submerged. You don't see the preceding footage before he's put into the water. It sort of jumps to those issues, and that makes it look as bad as possible. And he says, moreover,
PETA is actually using right now in their propaganda campaign a clip from our trailer where you see a dog jumping into a roiling, dangerous rapid. That was done with a computer. It's a computer-generated dog, but PETA's making it look like somehow like we had a dog jump into a really dangerous situation, which couldn't be further from the truth.
So you're not even watching a real dog when you see it
in the trailer.
Trailer jump into the water.
But the video he challenges the way the video was edited together, and TMZ published 100% of the video that it received. But the people who initially recorded it apparently edited it together. And he says not that what happened in the scenes didn't happen, but just that it decontextualizes it by not showing sort of what happened just before that, what happened just after that, and sort of makes it seem like the dog, I guess, was in more danger than it actually was.
That's right. And there's a point there, right? We could only sort of run the footage that we had, and we have no insight into what actually went down on that set. Only who filmed it and the people that were there can actually say what happened there. And I think he's right as far as it goes, right? There is a misleading element in not showing that context, but he does take ownership and responsibility for the fact that that dog was in distress, and he doesn't walk away from that, I think, to his credit.
But he reserves his harshest words for the American Humane Association.
I think that I have to take responsibility for one thing, which is I knew that AHA, American Humane, is not an adequate protector of animals on set. There have been other problems in the past. It is the standard, and every studio movie that has animals in it has American Humane there to protect the animals. They failed.
Let's really talk about who they are for a second. Beyond just that, they're hired by the studios themselves.
That's right. That's right. And that's what Gavin actually zeroes in on. He says, look, to the extent that this animal was endangered, yes, I take some responsibility. I'm the producer of the film, but that is the AHA's role to make sure that we're within the parameters of acceptable safety standards for these animals on the set. And if they didn't chirp up, then maybe the animal wasn't in as much distress as to make a big issue. He says it obviously looks that way in the footage that we ran on the website, but he's saying the AHA, the problem is they may not be entirely independent because the film studios that are putting these movies together, and SAG maybe to a lesser extent, is funding the AHA. They're the people who pay the AHA to be on the set, and how can they be fully independent if the studio is breathing down their neck?
Well, they clearly can't be independent if the studio is breathing down their neck, but I think he's talking a little bit on both sides of his mouth, because on the one hand he's saying, well, first of all, he acknowledges he was not present for filming that day.
That's right.
On the other hand, he says the dog was never in mortal danger, and although the dog was scared, it was not, they didn't put it in a position where its life could be lost or it could otherwise be physically injured.
And there's something to be said that there's handlers all around. I believe there's a scuba diver underneath the dog, so if it actually was drowning, it could be lifted up.
But what is he blaming for the AHA for if the dog was never in danger? I listened to the interview and I couldn't figure out exactly where he was going in there. Except he was spitballing. He didn't have this laid out. He was spitballing sort of the reasons why it wasn't quite as bad as it seemed.
Right.
And if it was bad, it wasn't necessarily on the movie or on him.
That's right. Some of it does seem like, and Gavin was, I think, very candid, and it was great for him to join. But some of it does seem to, even though he's taking blame, he's deflecting some of the blame and saying the AHA is the ultimate authority on these things. I'm just a producer. I make movies. I obviously love animals.
Which is okay, by the way. He does take some. He needs to be given credit for the fact he comes right out and he says right at the top, mistakes were made, and I take full responsibility for it.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I want to take this opportunity. So the AHA, we throw out this acronym. I wanted to talk a little bit about how this came to be. Why animals in film are treated the way they are. What's a little bit of the history. It actually goes way back, Jason. It goes way back to the vaudeville days. In the 1870s, they were using animals. There were plays and shows called, this is my favorite one, Laura Comstock's Bag Punching Dog. It was a dog that they put little gloves on and could punch a punching bag. There was a dog stealing a dinner, and Jumbo the Trained Elephant, of course. In 1920, it starts to get really rolling in the motion pictures. There's a big film, and you probably know a little bit about this. Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison had a famous rivalry over whether alternating current of Nikola Tesla or direct current of Thomas Edison was going to be the prevailing form of electricity. And so what did Edison do?
He shocked an elephant.
He shocked an elephant to death with an alternating current to prove that it was too dangerous.
Yeah.
We need to have DC current. So that obviously, Rin Tin Tin, all the famous ones. 100 horses died in the making of the 1926 version of Ben-Hur. And there was an early version of Hollywood Tarzan where he stabbed a lion to death during the filming. So animals were being mistreated early on in film, and that's what I think created some pressure.
So the AHA comes along, and frankly, things have gotten way better for animals in film. I mean, there were those stories that came out of the 40s and 50s when the Western era in the 50s and 60s especially became, big in American cinema, of horses being shot in the field to really imitate what it would really be like for a horse to be killed in a war scene or whatever it might be. You had also horses were tripped up with tripwires, so they would have a natural fall. And there was a lot of public outcry when those sort of things came to light.
Right.
And the AHA was instrumental in sort of reining that in. And they did some really good work, and I read a little bit of history, and they really are credited with modernizing the entire animal world in film, animal industry in film.
But to Gavin Pollone's point, everything you read about the AHA does mention there's been a lot of scholarly treatment of who funds them, because that's critical. And for a truly independent organization, you need to be funded independently. If the studios or SAG, who have a vested interest in the film getting made and getting made on budget for cheap and staying on the schedule, that's going to run up against the safety of the animals in some circumstances. That's a big tension there. The pendulum, though, you were alluding to, has swung so far that in 2011, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which I loved. Yeah. It's like it is the revamped Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston for the modern era. They did that movie completely with CGI. So there's not a real animal in it. And granted,
Right.
Caesar is talking and he's doing things that
No,
are
no.
humanistic, but they're animals in the movie.
It's true in the Jungle Book that came out last year, which was frankly my favorite movie of 2016 was the Jungle Book by Jon Favreau, and it was 100% created in a studio in downtown Los Angeles, notwithstanding it's a jungle scene with bears and
It's
and
phenomenal,
tigers
though, the
and
rendering
thing.
of it.
It's incredible, which I know brings us to PETA and his third comment, Gavin Pollone's third sort of, I think, line of thought when it comes to defending his movie and his actions against the criticisms.
That's exactly right. So PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, is at loggerheads, and PETA is always an organization that's at the vanguard. They are the ones who are opposing fur and throwing paint back in the day. So they're always protesting these animal rights issues. And what PETA says is, now we have CGI. We may not need animals at all anymore, and it's actually a disservice to use animals for entertainment in this way at all.
Right.
And Gavin says, now wait a minute. There's animal movies that need to be made that bring a lot of awareness. We were talking earlier about Free Willy. Those movies are not CGI rendered, and they're actually important, and they do a lot of good in some ways.
Free Willy, Babe, Homeward Bound, The Edge, that great Alec Baldwin, Anthony Hopkins movie. These all have trained animals in them, and PETA says no more.
Harry and Tonto. You remember old Art Carney with his cat? I mean, that's a beautiful movie.
And PETA says no more, and then Gavin Pollone talks about the fact that, hey, if you just want to have CGI, no animals, we can do it.
You're going to price out a lot of movies.
You're going to price out all movies because he said his movie, I think he said, would have cost $120 million to make if it was all CGI, and there's no way a movie like that, a family movie like that, is ever going to make that kind of money back. So you just wouldn't have the movies.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So look, Planet of the Apes and A Jungle Book are huge budget productions. These are $100 million movies, and they're wonderful. But he says, where are you going to get A Dolphin's Tale, which is a smaller budget movie and it's family friendly? It's a fascinating topic to me because I'm not sure that using animals at all for entertainment. There's something that resonates with me about PETA.
So PETA and Gavin Pollone have been at loggerheads, as you mentioned, and PETA, we wanted to hear PETA's position on this, and so we actually got a representative of PETA, senior vice president, to come out and talk about PETA's position and go after Gavin Pollone and respond to his comments. And we're going to get to that right after we talk a little bit more about Blue Apron.
Yeah, let's talk about Blue Apron.
So you got your food delivery, and I know you've been cooking up a storm.
I have. This has really stepped up my game.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got the first box, it was very exciting to get into. Now I feel like a professional chef because I watch a lot of Cooking Network, and you get this stuff. And it's ingredients that I'd never used before that I pass over in the store.
Right.
I'm getting good at chopping.
Right.
I've always wanted to be the guy who can chop.
He just wants to talk about the last thing that he made. Go ahead.
So you haven't gotten your box yet.
I
You'll
get my
know
box
this
tonight.
excitement
I could have
soon.
a box tonight, and I'm overwhelmed with excitement.
You're
Go ahead.
salivating. So I made the salmon this time, and it was delectable. It had a grain I'd never heard of, and that was delicious. I invite everyone to try it. It's called freeka. So you put the freeka in, you boil that up. It's delicious.
Get your freeka.
I loved it.
Yeah.
It was I don't know what you would maybe kind of like a barley-esque kind of ancient grain or something. The salmon was seared to perfection. It's these beautiful little steaks, no bones. You don't have to worry about any of that. You make this sort of fresh salsa.
I love hearing you talk about that.
It was so delicious, and you really feel like a professional chef. Mary came home to a meal that was composed. I had a vegetable. I had onion salsa on top, and it was astounding. Now, I didn't get to have Nix pick it this time because Nix was past her bedtime.
Yeah.
But I picked the right one myself.
Perfect. So, guys, again, go to blueapron.com/TMZ. 3 meals free, free shipping. Again, the freshest, tastiest. I mean, I've now eaten Blue Apron. You've now had a few meals of Blue Apron.
And it takes less than 40 minutes. So it's so easy because you'll get a home-cooked meal. You don't have to use a microwave.
It's less than $20 for you and your wife to eat. Convenient, fantastic, tasty food.
Yeah, so go to blueapron.com/TMZ. Get your first 3 meals free, and the shipping's on them.
All right, so now back to the podcast and back to the different perspective that we're going to get from PETA's Senior Vice President, Lisa Lang. So, Lisa, thanks so much for joining us. We noticed that prominent on PETA's website is the motto that animals are not ours to use for entertainment. Does it naturally flow from that it is never okay to feature animals in any movie production, regardless of any safeguards that are put in place to protect the animal's safety? Putting aside, of course, the documentary features where they're in their natural habitat and there's just cameras there. Is it never okay to use animals for entertainment purposes like those?
Well, I will tell you, the reason we come to this conclusion, and I'm sure that we can come up with exceptions, but the thing of it is wherever animals are used for profit, corners are going to be cut when it comes to their welfare at every stage of the process. So we just finished a 10-month undercover investigation at the outfit called Birds and Animals Unlimited that supplied the animals to A Dog's Purpose, among many other films. And what we found there, and what we have found throughout our 36 years, and what we hear from people who are whistleblowers on the set or who are whistleblowers behind the scene at these supply houses, is that animals are living, dogs, for example, are kept in dog-pound, barren, concrete kennels with no bedding for warmth, kept outside. Dogs and cats are trained through the use of food deprivation. So when you put the way the animals live behind the scenes, the way they are typically trained, it's a bad industry for animals. Now Hollywood's starting to realize that. We're starting to see Hollywood in general, for films and television, move away from the use of animals and move into instead using animatronics and CGI. I mean, no one can forget the bear scene in The Revenant. Not one bear was used.
Let me ask a question about that, because that's what actually fascinates me. So CGI is beautiful. We talked about this. The Jungle Book and Planet of the Apes, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, used, I think, exclusively CGI. But isn't that the province of big budget productions? And it would actually squeeze out any smaller movies. And I'm not necessarily in favor of them, but you will necessarily have fewer animal movies because only the big studios can use the CGI to that extent, and you'll miss out on the Free Willies and the Gorillas in the Mist, these movies that actually raise a good type of awareness for animals. What do you think about pushing all of those movies out?
Well, no, but that's not true anymore. CGI is getting ever more affordable. For example, The Walking Dead. I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hasn't seen this season, but there's a tiger.
You mean there's no Walking Dead?
in this season, and the tiger's 100% CGI. That's a television program.
Yeah.
With Free Willy. That was Keiko, the whale, who's become so famous because he was released and spent 5 years in the ocean before he died. They filmed that whale in his captive setting, and they did nothing additional to his life to upset his life. So what we're saying is use stock footage, film animals where they are if there's no intervention with their life, and you can make these movies. You can use CGI and animatronics affordably, and not one hair on an animal has to be harmed.
So you mentioned the AHA, and just to shift topics over there, I know that you and Gavin Polone, the producer of A Dog's Purpose, have your differences, but I think, from what he said to TMZ Live, I assume you agree with that the AHA is simply a rubber stamp for the studios and really doesn't do much good, if any. Is that your consensus? Is that the consensus in your world as well?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we absolutely agree on that, and that's what was kind of very disappointing with Gavin Polone, is that we met with him about this issue maybe 6 years ago. I won't have that date exactly right, but 6 years ago we were in total agreement. But on the day that they filmed a dog being put into rushing water for A Dog's Purpose, this man, Gavin Polone, who knows the problem with the AHA, left the monitoring of that day to an agency he abhors. And there's no excuse for that.
Well, he did say, he mentioned it as well in that interview. He said it was 5 years ago, 5, 6, doesn't matter. He said that he tried to push this issue with PETA to find an alternative solution to AHA given their problems, and that PETA really wasn't having it. And he sort of ascribed that to the absolutism of PETA, saying we don't want to have a discussion about making AHA better or replacing it with a better entity.
Yeah.
Is that not?
He doesn't know what he's talking about, unfortunately, and I do hear this is kind of a thing he does.
Mm-hmm.
We have written to the AHA so many times. We've asked them to even make changes like, for example, never give an approval rating to a film that uses chimpanzees. Even that small step, take that step. No, they won't respond to that. And what's more, it's not just the monitoring on set. And that's the thing that Gavin knows that I wish he would just admit. It's what happens behind the scenes. He is a really kind man, Gavin is. He is all heart when it comes to animals, but he's also a businessman, and he wanted to make this film probably for all the right reasons. But as long as the animals are used in the business, and as you're not going to find a monitoring service that's going to be there at every step of the way, and that's why we just have to go in another direction that's safer for animals across the board.
I just want to put a sort of a finer point on it. So is the idea that only CGI or only documentation of animals in their existing habitats, and if you're at SeaWorld and they're just filming the whale at SeaWorld, that's also okay, because my concern, and Jason I think shares some of this, is that you don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think there are some good films that can be made that are net good for animals. Now, that maybe can't be done in CGI. I do think of like a Gorillas in the Mist. I remember watching it as a kid and feeling differently about gorillas and their behavior in the wild, and Diane Fossey and the whole thing. I worry about those movies and PETA PETA's position maybe excluding some of those good projects, and I wonder how you guys wrestle with that.
Yeah, I hear you totally. It's just that you can make those movies today without using animals, and we're obligated to do it. I grew up watching Lassie and Sounder and Flipper, of all things, so I get it. I was influenced by those things as well. But today, young people are influenced by different things. The footage they're watching is the real stuff. They're watching a lot of documentaries. And because we can't afford to use CGI, we must use CGI. It isn't okay to just say, well, we can sacrifice the few for the greater good, especially today, because you don't have to.
Yeah, it sounds like you don't have to, number one. And number two, the enemy isn't, the perfect isn't the enemy of the good. It sounds like there is really no good, given that behind the behind the scenes treatment that you're describing.
Because the profit incentive maybe perverts.
It will necessarily.
We know it perverts the treatment.
Yeah.
And he would tell you this before anybody. Time is money on a set.
He said it. He said it. As a matter of fact,
I will tell you that some of the best whistleblowers we've had were trainers themselves, because I will tell you, too, we don't paint these people with a broad brush. Some are much better than others. We've had people call us from a set very nervous about a shoot that was going to take place, and they do this anonymously. We've contacted production companies. We've been in meetings with the production companies, and we know the whistleblowers in the room. And we can hear the production company lying to us about the safety of the animals, and that whistleblower is sitting right there. It isn't right. And when you talk about the whistleblower on a dog's purpose, and I know Gavin has an issue with the fact that the footage came out when it did versus the day that it happened. And what we say to that is, we don't know that this person didn't complain on that day. And we've asked the AHA to release their full report. They haven't done it yet. But the thing is, it could have been reported. It probably was reported, as has happened in so many other movies, and it's swept under the rug. I don't think Gavin knew, probably.
Right.
But other people probably did.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much. I mean, these are heavy duty issues, and we really appreciate your time.
I have to tell you, I actually learned a lot in the last 10 minutes that I did not know, and I can't thank you enough for that. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It was our pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
So, Derek, I love the perspective. I challenged her a little bit there, but I think she certainly knows the arguments well.
Yeah, I think we laid out the two major positions. We got a producer defending his movie, and we've got PETA, the ultimate protector of the animals.
Rights.
So I thought it was pretty good.
Before we go, what about legal liability here? So we've got these guys who are accused, at least by PETA, of engaging in some form of cruelty to this dog. Any criminal liability these guys could face?
As a technical matter, yes. I would say as a practical matter, pretty unlikely. But the AHA is that governing body, but there is a separate legal regime where you can haul people into criminal court for cruelty to animals. There's both federal overlay. There's the Federal Animal Welfare Act, which was enacted to ensure that animals for exhibition purposes are protected. There's been some case law that says this covers films, and a few studios get licenses. Playboy has a license, and Walt Disney are the two ones in California that have actually a license to exhibit animals, and that provides some level of protection. Then there's also the Endangered Species Act, which I found very interesting.
Likely does not apply to German Shepherds.
Doesn't apply to German Shepherds, but may apply to the Free Willies of this world. Like the orcas may get some protection. And actually, they look into whether the movie will enhance the survival of the species or hurt the survival of the species. And we talked about this with Free Willy. Does it enhance or does it hurt the survival of orcas? Go ahead.
Right. Well, I was just going to make a joke about the spotted owl, death films are probably covered by the Endangered Species
But
Act.
It's interesting, though, right?
But Free Willy, right, because the argument that PETA would make, obviously, and is that the more people enjoying watching orcas and might be more inclined to go to a place like SeaWorld.
Right.
And as we talked about, SeaWorld is not the best place, has been accused of not being the best place for these orcas to be
That's right.
trapped.
So it's a little bit of tension. You got love for the orcas, but all the kids want to see Free Willy, and they got to go see him at SeaWorld. So it's a little bit of a tension there. One interesting part, is that not all animals are protected under this federal regime, and I found it very interesting. The American Welfare Act or the Animal Welfare Act, sorry, protects live and dead dogs, cats, monkeys, and the cute animals. But what are specifically excluded are birds, rats, mice, horses. So
the horses are excluded.
I thought that was pretty interesting.
I'm stunned by that.
Yeah, they're specifically excluded from the law's protection, at least that law. Now, there are state laws.
There are general overlays also of animal cruelty laws that are covered under state law typically, and you can certainly be prosecuted under those. California, of all places, where most movies are made, is the most protective of animal rights, and so you would certainly run afoul of those kinds of laws.
That's right. And under California's law, there's it's what we call a wobbler. There's misdemeanor versions of animal cruelty, and there's also felony versions. And with the felony versions, you can do up to 3 years in prison.
Yeah.
But that's a stiff sentence. I don't think we've ever seen someone do 3 years for filming style animal cruelty. Maybe you'll get slapped on the wrist. You'll have a couple fines just to show they mean business. But prison time is a remote possibility, not really out there.
All right. Parker, what you got for us?
Mail time. Remember to write in your questions and comments to behindthebar@tmz.com. First one up's from Morgs. You start the podcast with a clip. The very clip you played has Trump referring to media who write stories that are purposely negative, horrible, and false. Then you immediately decide Trump is talking about stories he doesn't like, that was in quotes, and completely gloss over his exact words, purposeful, negative, and false. Aren't you guilty of doing exactly what he is talking about?
You know, it's a really good question, and I think it's a fair question, but ultimately I think the answer is no. That's not what Donald Trump is talking about, and that's not what we're talking about. As we discussed, purposefully false stories are already outlawed.
You don't need to open up libel laws for that. They exist.
So when Donald Trump says, I'm going to open up libel laws to include additional things, which is what he said, again, purposefully false comments are already barred by the law. So what he is opening up to are negative, and it's an important word to say, negative. He didn't need to say that. If he said libel laws should govern purposefully false, it would be redundant with what the law already is, but that's what he would be talking about. Here he introduced the word negative, and we all know, and this is not a shot at Donald Trump.
It really isn't.
It really isn't. But when you start to open up the libel laws to negative stories, what you're saying is if they're positive and they're false, that's okay. But if they're negative and they're false, I, the President of the United States, should be able to sue you and get money because of the negativity. And that's really where he does run afoul of the Constitution.
And make no mistake about it, when he says negative stories, he's worried not about their falsity or truthfulness. He's worried about the impact on how he's perceived. Yes. And so that is the problem. And it is distinctly American to have negatively styled stories. That is what the Fourth Estate is there for, in large part, is holding their feet to the fire. If you drift towards all positive stories and a state-run media, you're really looking like a communist country.
And I want to make one more point on this. Donald Trump certainly knows exactly what he is saying because he has sued a number of people, including Bill Maher and others, for making purposely false statements. What he says are purposely false statements about him. So he knows when he says opening up the libel laws that he is including something more than purposefully false statements. He is adding them. He is adding this element of just negative stories, regardless of the purposefully false nature of
Now, the Bill Maher one was interesting because he said he was the product of an orangutan, and so he also doesn't like jokes. And remember, Donald Trump filed his birth certificate and said, both of these are humans. I see no orangutan. Please pay me.
Fascinatingly, it was not the long form birth certificate. It was short form.
It was short form.
All right, next one up is talking about drug testing reporters from Johnny Smoke. It's a violation.
Johnny Smoke.
Yeah.
It's a violation of the First
Amendment. Drug testing.
It's a violation of the First Amendment to censor the press. Throwing out anyone who fails a test or refuses to take a test is censorship. No charge, federal or otherwise, exists for failing a drug test. You must be in possession of an illegal substance to be convicted.
We're not talking about crimes here, though. We're talking about getting the proper accreditation to cover the White House, and there are certainly a lot of regulations. If you breach federal laws, you're not going to be given that accreditation. And it is not a First Amendment right to smoke pot.
That's right. This is the difference between a sort of right and a privilege. We're not saying that to go in and become a credentialed White House reporter, they can have a drug test if they'd like. It's just part of the accreditation process. Whether it's wise to do that is different, but you have no absolute right to be in the press corps of the White House, just as you have no absolute right to drive a car. We can have a licensing provision. It's a privilege, and we dole those out differently than rights.
Right. I mean, if they were using it as some sort of way, a proxy to keep an entire arm of the journalistic establishment out, that might be an issue. But here, it's what they're saying is individuals who don't pass these tests will be precluded, and although unseemly and short-sighted and dumb, it wouldn't be illegal.
Yeah, we don't have race and religious tests and things that are noxious like that, but there's a rational basis, I think, to not have stoners in the White House.
That's right.
And I think that is it for this week's Mail Time.
Well, thanks, Parker, and thanks to everybody who wrote in. Once again, Blue Apron.
Don't forget to go to blueapron.com/TMZ. Get your first 3 meals free.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you next week again. Remember, go to the iTunes store and subscribe to Behind the Bar, and you can check us out on YouTube at TMZ's YouTube page.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thanks for watching. If you want more nerdy deep dives into the legal side of celebrity news, hit our subscribe button right here.
And check out our previous episodes over here.